Welcome back to the Nest, peeps. In today's video, we're painting Hutchuck. Now, this is not my model. This is a model I am painting for a friend. Chris is one of the players in our local gaming group, and I am painting Hutchuck up for him as a thank you for the horde of Signar models that he has bestowed upon me. He didn't really have a preference as to how he wanted Hutchuck painted up. He told me that I could do whatever I wanted with it. I wanted to paint Hutchuck up in a way that would fit in with Chris's current Minions army. He plays both Pharaoh and Gators, so I had a little bit to work with. The Pharaoh side of his army seems to be more on the red and brown side, whereas the Gator side of the army is green and gator colored. So for Hutchuck, I decided to blend those two worlds. That's right. I'm going to be painting a red and green color scheme. The goal is to try and pull off this red and green color scheme while avoiding the dreaded Christmas curse. However, so long as I keep either the red or the green desaturated, I should be able to pull it off. One of the reasons a lot of red and green's color scheme models end up looking like Christmas is because they both use a saturated red and a saturated green and use both of those colors about 50%. And it is because of that that the model ends up looking like it belongs in a Christmas catalog. That's enough talking. Let's get to painting. I primed Hutchuck up in black, and I did not give it a zenithal highlight. The reason I did that is because I wanted to give myself the extra challenge of painting him completely with a brush. Starting with the innermost portions of this model, we're going to paint all of the chainmail with Chainmail Silver from Vallejo. After finishing the silver bits, I decided to come in and paint the base so that I would have that out of the way so that I wouldn't have to worry about working around a fully painted model later. I traditionally do my bases last, but since this is a pre-sculpted base, best to just get it out of the way. And what we're doing here is an overbrush of heavy brown from Vallejo with a dry brushed highlight of Iraqi sand. This model gave me the perfect opportunity to test out some of the new paints that I've acquired from Scale 75 from the Blood and Fire set. And the first of those colors that I'm going to try is the deep red, and I'm going to use that for the base coat on all of the armor plating. While I was letting that base coat dry, I decided to pivot over to the cloth bits on this model, including the padding that's hanging below the armor. To save myself some time on this model, I decided to use the black primer as the base coat and just start highlighting up from there. I want these cloth bits to read as green, so my first set of highlights is going to be Ardennes Green from Scale 75. And I give the upper portion of each section a highlight with Field Gray. This desaturated green should help pivot us away from Christmas Town, while also giving a little wink to the Gator side of Chris's army by making this padding resemble gator skin. After finishing up with the cloth, I decided that I wanted to get the face out of the way, since that's the only really exposed skin on this model. I start with a little bit of barbarian flesh mixed in with some leather brown from Army Painter. We want to start with our skin tone dark enough to give us room to highlight later. Once that base coat dries, I come in with some pure barbarian flesh and I start to sketch out the highlights on the face. And then once that is dried, I come in with some Army Painter Flesh Wash and I put that over the entire face. After painting the face, I decided I wanted this gas mask to also be green, so I followed the same steps that I did with the cloak on the bottom, and I started with a base coat of Ardennes Green and then gave it a highlight of Field Gray. I felt that painting the gas mask green as well really helped tie the upper portion of this model into the lower half. I'm trying to be mindful of my highlights to try and capture how the light would be hitting this gas mask with it flipped up on top of Hutchuck's head like this. After futzing around with all of the green bits, it's time to come back to the red armor panels. And we're going to start by establishing our mid-tone now with Blood Red from the Vallejo Scale 75 set. And the cylindrical portion of this right shoulder pad here really gave me a test in my blending ability. Throughout this entire painting process, I was constantly coming back and forth to this shoulder pad, glazing up, glazing down, trying to get the best transition that I could. And our final highlight color for these red armor panels is going to be Scale 75's Antares Red. At least I think that's how you pronounce this color. Using this color for the final highlight lets me push this red real close to an orange without completely stepping over that line, and the armor still reading as red. And once again, I found myself futzing about back and forth with this highlight to try and get that transition as smooth as I possibly could. I really wanted to push myself towards improvement with this model and get me out of my comfort zone. Eventually, I got myself to a point to where I was happy with that transition, and I moved on to painting the rest of the model. Up next were all the leather bits on this model, which I started with a base coat of leather brown from Army Painter. And let me tell you, Hutchuck has way more leather straps than I had originally thought. It took me a while to get all this base coated. Now it's time to paint all the trim and all the copper bits, and we're going to start here with a base coat of Tinny Tin from Vallejo Game Color. This is the darkest tone in the Game Color copper line, and because of that, it allows us to get maximum contrast when we start to highlight this later. While I'm waiting for that layer of Tinny Tin to dry, I decided to come in with some plate mail metal from Army Painter and cut in the rest of the metal bits on this armor, such as any kind of spikes, rivets, bolts. All those things got a coat of the plate metal. I didn't choose this plate metal silver for any particular reason other than it's been sitting on my rack for a while and I needed a project to use some of it up on. Believe it or not, this bottle of paint is about 3 years old and it still applies very well. I forgot how well the Army Painter metals applied. For a lot of these little metal bits, I got solid coverage in one coat. You can kind of see what I'm talking about here while I'm painting this spike on the end of the mace. The paint slides off the brush smoothly and you don't really have to fight anything. By this point, our Tinny Tin has dried and it's time to come in and apply some of those highlights we were talking about earlier. This highlight is going to be Brassy Brass from Vallejo Game Color, and it's going to give us some nice contrast with the darker Tinny Tin. Most of the models that I have painted have been intended for the tabletop, so I tend to favor true metallic metals. However, this method of highlighting your true metallics kind of gives you a little blend of both worlds, giving a quasi non-metallic metal feel when viewed from a tabletop's distance away. As you can see here, most of this is just edge highlighting. Now that we are finally done with all the metallic portions of this model, it's time to come in and give our leather a little bit of love. We are going to be applying a highlight of Iraqi sand from Vallejo Model Color to all of our leather bits. Mostly we're going to be doing edge highlights here, but then we're going to add a bunch of scratch highlights so that we can give this leather that worn feeling. With the sheer amount of leather straps and buckles and belts on this model, I was really able to stretch my texture legs and push myself outside of my comfort zone. Finally, it was time for me to figure out what I wanted to do with these canisters on this model. I knew I wanted to go fluorescent, so I started things off with a base coat of cold gray from Vallejo. Traditionally, these canisters are a fluorescent green. However, a fluorescent green with the red that I chose for this armor would kind of end up looking like Christmas, and that's exactly what we're trying to avoid. The eyes are also going to get a base coat of cold gray because they will as well be fluorescent. I have found that the best way to use fluorescent paints is to apply them as a glaze. So the first thing we're going to have to do is establish a nice gradient as the undercoat for that glaze. And here you can see me applying a coat of that cold gray with a little bit of white mixed in to start off that gradient process. You can use a couple techniques to achieve this gradient. Here I just went with a quick and dirty layering technique. We want our final highlight here to be pure white, this way we can get that maximum punch from our fluorescent paint. The white itself is thinned down to a glaze consistency, and I'm applying it over these canisters in a smaller and smaller area, getting smaller as we get closer to the center line of that canister. We're also going to take some of that pure white and apply it to the centermost point of Hutchuck's eyes. While I was still deciding what color I wanted to use on those canisters, I decided to come in and apply the dark tone wash to all of our leather and metal bits on the model. This wash step combined with the highlight step that we did earlier is going to give us a really dynamic looking leather. And while this strong tone wash will help establish the shadows on our metal bits, it's also going to give a nice grungy tone to all of the metal. And since I had the strong tone wash already out on the palette, I decided to apply that to the entirety of the base. And after buying myself as much time as I could with the wash step, I finally decided on fluorescent yellow for these canisters. The other options were fluorescent magenta and blue, but yellow just seems to be the perfect choice for this particular project. This yellow glaze took very nicely to that gradient undercoat that we did earlier. I painted the eyes fluorescent yellow to complete this triangle of focus here, and it helps balance that yellow throughout the model so it doesn't look out of place. The yellow on the canisters was still kind of looking a little flat, so I decided to come in here with some pure white and add a final highlight that would help give these canisters some depth. With that, the painting portion was completed, and it was time to come in here and make this base a little bit more interesting. And what better way to do that than with some tufts? All of the tufts. Let's use as many tufts as we can fit in here. Now, I've had these tufts for a while, and I forget who makes them, but the label on the box only says that the color of the tuft is dead grass. So that's what I have for you. Once I had finished up with the tufts, I applied several coats of AK Interactive's Ultra Matte Varnish, and Hutchuck is complete. Highlighting the metal the way that we did allowed the metal to still read as metal even after we applied that matte varnish, which is notorious for dimming down true metallic metals. However, on the plus side, it took away the shine from all of the washing that we did and really allowed those leather straps to stand out. And there you have it, Hutchuck finished in a red and green color scheme. Well, what do you think? Does Hutchuck look like he belongs on holiday candy packaging, or did I pull it off? Let me know in the comment section down below. All in all, I'm happy with how this project turned out, and hopefully Chris is too. If you'd like to hang out with the peeps and talk hobby, join us over on our Discord server at Robbins Nest Studios on Discord. I'll put a link down in the description below. That's going to be a wrap on this video. I will catch you in the next one. As always, keep on painting, peeps.